Hi everyone, welcome to a new video. If you're new to my channel, my name is Rita and I do book and movie reviews in the hopes of introducing you to your next favorite. And for this week's video, I will be talking about my favorite TV show of all time, Gilmore Girls, in a video that I will be calling We Are All Rory Gilmore. If, like me, you grew up watching Gilmore Girls and were a Ravenclaw type, academically minded person who enjoyed reading, then you almost certainly identified with Rory Gilmore. And at the opening of the show, we see Rory going from what is indicated to us as a pretty mediocre public school to the prestigious private school of Chilton, and from then on, we see her going all the way to Yale. After 7 seasons, the show ended far too early and without any of the resolutions that we had been hoping for. And so in 2016, almost 10 years later, A Year in a Life came out, and this new season had a very different tone to it. The financial crisis of 2008 had hit by then, and the prospects of all Rory Gilmores were looking far less sunny. So A Year in a Life came out in 2016, and I found myself with a certain urge to watch it again during this pandemic. It's looking like a certainty at this point that this pandemic is going to throw my entire generation into a financial abyss, much like we were thrown into back in 2008. And so I found myself turning to Gilmore Girls again, not looking for answers, but looking for sympathy. At the end of Gilmore Girls, Rory was about to go out into the world to pursue her career as a journalist, and armed with her degree from Yale, once the season ended, we've pretty much assumed that what would happen to her is that she would manage to make her dream come true. She would go traveling around the world and become a famous journalist. And boy, were we wrong. At the opening of A Year in a Life, we find a Rory Gilmore that is being tossed around from office to office, spending all her savings going from one business meeting to another one in the hopes of making something of herself, and yet there's simply no work. All that is offered to her is a word that I have absolutely grown to hate: opportunities. And opportunities translates into work that you do for us for free in the hopes of getting paid work eventually. Except that since there are no jobs in your field, the promise of paid work is left hanging in the air and is very much an empty one, as it always turns out to be. And what we see as well is that the previous generation shows no sympathy towards this situation whatsoever. And we see this in Gilmore Girls. An author with whom Rory was hoping to write a book makes her spend all her money traveling from New York to London to meet her and to discuss the plans for this book, and then all of a sudden just drops her out of the project for a petty reason of her own. And then we also see institutions that we know are rolling in cash, telling Rory that they want her to write a piece for them, but that they simply cannot afford to pay her, and so that all her work will be done on a speculative basis. Eventually, Rory moves back with her mother and decides to write a book, and this is portrayed as very much of a happy ending, something out of Little Women. So Rory becomes this kind of Jo March character that doesn't really know what to do with her life, but who decides to write about her own experiences and the experiences of her family. And this is an incredibly unrealistic way in which to end the story, which is probably a good thing. I appreciate that they tried to go for an optimistic ending because At this point, we probably couldn't handle any more of the truth. But if this is Rory's one shot at making out of her mother's house, it is almost certainly going to backfire. The odds that this book will ever get published are incredibly slim. Unless Rory has a creative writing professor back in Yale who really liked her and who is willing to use those sweet, sweet Yale contacts for her, Rory is going to have to very much do this on her own and write a letter to an agent that is going to be one in over 100 a day that gets sent with book proposals. And then out of all of those, in a year, an agent will maybe pick one client out of all of them. And this is an optimistic view, because the reality is that many agents will not even consider your book proposal unless it's directly recommended to them. And we know that Jess has a publishing house, but we also know that it's quite a small one. So maybe he could publish Rory's book for her, but he really wouldn't have the financial resources to really do the kind of marketing that would really get the book out there. Which means that in all likelihood, this book is going to be read by half a dozen of Rory's friends in Stars Hollow that I'm sure will be very supportive. Luke will most definitely put the cover and the blurb on the new menu at the diner. And yet the odds that Rory will ever make any money out of this book are pretty much zero. And this is the lie that has been told to our generation and that has turned all of us, as Babette says in the show, a group of kids who've been to college, then out into the real world, and it spit them out like a stale piece of gum, and now they're all back in their old rooms. We will be the first generation to be worse off than their parents' generation. Our parents got opportunities that their parents never got and managed to build a more comfortable life for themselves. And they had assumed that they would be able to do even better for us. And so they scraped and they saved in order to send us to good universities, believing that if they did so, we would be rewarded tenfold down the line. We grew up with the idea that, as Jane Austen writes in Mansfield Park, and it's possibly very, very relevant that this line is said by a character who is arguably very evil and who lies throughout the entirety of the novel, and that goes, "Give a girl an education and introduce her properly into the world, and 10 to 1, but she has the means of settling well without further expense to anybody." What we're finding is completely different. And this is what A Year in a Life shows in such a candid way. If you already have loads of money, then you're going to be absolutely fine. If your parents owned a business, and yes, I am looking at you, Logan Huntsberger, then you will find a job there. You will just follow the same path that your parents took. But otherwise, you are probably going to have to do something that you never imagined yourself doing, and in all likelihood, something that you really, really don't want to do. And in reality, this is very probably what is going to happen to Rory if we're being realistic. While she immediately rejects the suggestion of doing a master's degree in teaching because she considers becoming a high school teacher to be something that is beneath her, that is almost certainly what she is going to have to do. Gilmore Girls was already pretty good at demonstrating that the idea that if you work really hard, life will reward you is really not something that is realistic at all. Lorelai doesn't have what she has because she worked really hard. She did work really hard, but it's really the piles and piles of money that her parents have that make all the difference in the end. Without these piles of money, her house would have been completely eaten by termites. Rory would have never been able to go to Chiltern. then she would have never been able to go to Yale. And Luke's money also came in handy when Lorelai needed to buy the inn. So without all this money that she did not work for, that she did not earn herself, Lorelai would never have become a business owner, but she would have stayed a business manager, and Rory would have never gone to Chiltern or Yale and would have just stayed in the mediocre public school that we are told Stars Hollow School is. And so we know that the chances for Lorelai to succeed were already not great if it wasn't for her parents' money. But Rory's reality is one of its own. It's one that demonstrates that the system is rigged against young people and is a system that exploits young people with promises of work that are never ever going to be fulfilled. And the Rory Gilmore of Gilmore Girls was never realistic to begin with. She was a girl who went from a not very good public school into one of the most demanding private schools in the country, and besides that 1D that she got at the beginning, went from struggling to becoming the valedictorian in her class at light speed. But the Rory Gilmore, on the other hand, in A Year in a Life, is a perfect symbol for our generation and is all of us. Okay everyone, that is my video for this week. If you have enjoyed it, please like it below and subscribe to my channel. And if you would like to see more videos like this, then please consider joining my Patreon community. Through Patreon, you can support my channel and in return receive exclusive perks such as monthly book reviews and personalized book recommendations. And in the meantime, you can also follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Goodreads. And I will see you guys around.